Around 3,600 years ago, a scribe in southern Iraq pressed into wet clay the exact reason the gods decided to drown the human race. And the reason is not what you were taught. It is not sin. It is not wickedness. It is not disobedience. It is noise. We were too loud. We multiplied, and we made a din, and one god could not sleep through it. So he moved to erase us. That sounds like a translation error. It isn't. It is the plain reading of a Babylonian poem called Atrahasis in the Standard Critical Edition published by Wilfrid Lambert and Alan Millard in 1969. And that is not even the strangest part. 1,000 years before the book of Genesis was written down, this same flood already had a round ark, a giant reed boat sealed with tar, and the animals boarded it 2 by 2. I'll show you the tablet that says so before the end. So here is the claim I want to defend for the next 20 minutes in clay, with catalog numbers you can check tonight. The flood is older than the Bible. It was not a Hebrew story that traveled outward. By every dated document we have, it traveled the other way. And the people who wrote it down did not preach it. They filed it. Now let me clear the ground first, because you have heard about Sumerian tablets and a flood before, and most of what you've heard is junk. No, this is not proof that one global flood once covered the whole earth. No, it is not the literal Ark of Noah found on a mountain. And no, this has nothing to do with Zecharia Sitchin, the Anunnaki, or ancient astronauts. If that is why you came, this isn't it. What you are going to get is the real version. And the real version is stranger than the clickbait. Because it is cataloged, it is dated, and you can read it tonight from your phone. And here is how strange. This isn't fringe. That a flood story older than Genesis exists in Mesopotamia is not a controversial theory. It has been mainstream consensus since 1872. It is in the standard handbooks. It sits in the British Museum, one of the most visited museums in the world. And almost nobody tells it straight. So I want you to hold one object in your head for this whole video. A broken piece of baked clay in the British Museum right now. Catalog number K3375. About 15 centimeters tall. Cramped cuneiform, broken edges. It fits in one hand. Nothing on the outside announces what it is. Like most important things. That tablet is the one a self-taught banknote engraver named George Smith was studying. In November of 1872, when he stood up, ran around the reading room and, by the account Wallace Budge left us, began to take off his clothes. He had just become the first person in over 2,000 years to read what was on it. What had he read? Let's go and read it too. Smith's tablet is the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of a king of Uruk hunting for a way out of death. The London copy was carved in the 7th century BC, but the poem behind it is older, and the flood inside it is older still. It was lifted in from Atrahasis. The poem with the motive. Keep that in mind. The tablet is a copy. The story underneath keeps going down. And that story, read closely, is the Bible's flood with the mask off. In Tablet 11, the gods vote to wipe out mankind. One god breaks ranks. Ea, the god of wisdom, has sworn not to warn any human being. So he finds a loophole. He doesn't speak to the man. He speaks to the man's reed wall, knowing the man is asleep on the other side. In Andrew George's translation, O reed fence, O wall, wall, O man of Shuruppak, son of Ubara-Tutu, demolish the house and build a boat, abandon wealth and seek survival, Take on board the boat all living things seed. I want you to sit with that for a second. A God who is forbidden to lie and forbidden to warn finds the one gap between the two and tells the truth to a wall. That is not a primitive scene. It is one of the most ethically sophisticated moves in all of ancient literature, and it was pressed into clay before Moses is supposed to have been born. You already know what comes next. You learned it under another name: a boat, the family, the seed of every living thing, taken aboard, a flood. The boat runs aground on a mountain. On Mount Nimush, the boat ran aground and held it fast. Then the survivor sends out birds to find dry land: a dove, a swallow, a raven. And when the water falls, he burns an offering. And here is the line that made Victorian England deeply uncomfortable. The gods smelled the sweet savor. The gods gathered like flies around the man making sacrifice. Like flies. Now read Genesis 8, verse 21. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. Same scene, same beat. One is just older and rawer. Now, I am not telling you a flood literally drowned the planet, or that Noah is a forgery of a Babylonian king. I am telling you what the clay says. And what the clay says is uncomfortable enough on its own. Because you might be thinking, fine, the stories match. But this London tablet is a 7th century copy. Maybe the Hebrews wrote it first, and Nineveh borrowed. It is exactly the right objection, and it has an answer. The answer is the second tablet, the one with the motive. Atrahasis does something almost no ancient text ever does. It signs and dates itself. Its fullest copy carries a colophon, a scribe's own signature block, naming a junior scribe, Epic Aya, who copied it in the city of Sippar, in the reign of King Ammi-Saduqa of Babylon. That puts the tablet at around 1635 BC. Let me say that in the dry academic way, so there is no doubt. This is not a flood story we estimate as old. It is a flood story with a name and a date on it, written when, by standard dating, the text of Genesis was still close to 1,000 years in the future. The tablet does not argue about its age, it states it. And underneath Atrahasis, there is something older still. In the Penn Museum in Philadelphia sits a tablet, CBS 10673, dug out of Nippur and published by Arno Pobel back in 1914. Scholars call it the Eridu Genesis. It is written not in Babylonian but in Sumerian, the oldest language we can still read. Same flood. The hero is a pious king named Ziusudra, who survives and is granted eternal life. So count the chain. Genesis in Hebrew. Behind it, Tablet 11 in Babylonian. Behind that, Atrahasis, signed and dated. Behind that, Ziusudra in Sumerian. The floor of written language, each layer older than the one before it. By every dated document we actually hold, the flood does not flow from the Hebrews outward. It flows the other way. But poems borrow from poems. None of that proves anyone treated the flood as a thing that happened, which is why the next witness is not a poem at all. It is a government document. In the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, there is a clay prism about 20 centimeters tall, 4 written faces, with a hole bored down the middle for a wooden spindle, so you could turn it and read it like a rotating file. Catalog number AN 1923.444. The Weld-Blundell Prism, written around 1800 BC. The most complete copy of the Sumerian King List, not a hymn, not an epic, a list. The driest thing a bureaucracy ever produced. Who was king, in which city, for how long? It opens like this. After the kingship descended from heaven, in Eridug, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years, 8 kings across 5 cities. And the section closes its own ledger. In 5 cities, 8 kings. They ruled for 241,200 years. And then the ledger writes one line that should not be in a ledger. Then the flood swept over. 4 words. No drama, no theology. The same flat tone a registry would use for a fire in the archive. And after those 4 words, the list just resumes. The reigns start shrinking toward human numbers. It even lists a king of Uruk you have already met. Gilgamesh ruled for 126 years. The hero of the poem in London is a filed entry in Oxford. So ask what the prism forces on you. What if this is not mythology that decayed into history, but a civilization's own filing system in which the flood was simply an entry? The Sumerians did not preach the flood. They archived it. And now, the detail this whole video has been walking toward. Look at the last king before the flood on that prism. His name is Ubara-Tutu, king of Shuruppak. Now, go back to London. To tablet 11, line 23. The warning through the wall. The god calls the chosen man, man of Shuruppak, son of Ubara-Tutu. Read that again. 2 documents, written centuries apart in 2 languages for 2 completely different reasons. Today, they sit in 2 museums in 2 English cities, and they name the same family in the same city on the same edge of the same flood. The survivor of the poem is the son of the last king on the list. You can read the father's name in Oxford in the morning, and the son's name in London that afternoon. Nobody stitched that together for you. The 2 halves of one record have been sitting in separate glass cases, quietly agreeing for 4,000 years. That is not how legends behave. That is how records behave. Now, I have to be honest about what is lineage and what isn't, because that is exactly where most channels cheat. Inside Mesopotamia, these texts are relatives. Gilgamesh literally paraphrases Atrahasis line after line. That is not a mysterious convergence. That is direct copying. Same family, same ink. But step outside that family, and the same skeleton keeps reappearing. Another tablet at Oxford lists 10 kings before the flood. Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing for the Greek world around 280 BC, also counted 10, and called his flood hero Xisuthros. And Genesis, chapter 5, counts 10 patriarchs from Adam to Noah. 3 traditions, separated by language and by centuries, and the same bones. 10 names, then the flood. And it goes one layer deeper. And this is the part that ties straight to the last video on this channel. The 7th king on that Sumerian list is Enmen-dur-Ana of Sippar, who in Mesopotamian tradition was taken up into the company of the gods and taught the secrets of heaven. Now count to the 7th patriarch in Genesis. His name is Enoch. He lives 365 years, the number of days in a solar year. And then, in the text's own words, he was not, for God took him. The 7th name, taken up to heaven in both lists. If that rings a bell, it should. That is the man this channel built an entire video around. And then the most famous detail of all. In 2014, Irving Finkel, a curator at the British Museum, published a tablet from around 1750 BC that gives the instructions for building the flood boat. 2 surprises. The Ark is round, a giant coracle of rope and tar, and the animals go in the tablet's own words, 2 by 2, the single most recognizable image of Noah's Ark. The animals, 2 by 2, was pressed into Babylonian clay 1,000 years before Genesis took its final shape. I told you I would show you that tablet. There it is. So is there a real flood under all of this? Here is the honest answer, and it cuts both ways. In 1928, the archaeologist Leonard Woolley was digging at Ur when his workers cut through up to 12 feet of clean, water-laid silt. No pottery, no walls, nothing human, sitting between 2 layers of a living city. His wife looked into the pit and said, "Well, of course, it's the flood." Woolley cabled London, and the headlines wrote themselves. And then the dig kept going, and the dates refused to cooperate. The silt at Ur belongs to one millennium, a flood layer at Kish to another, one at Shuruppak to around 2900 BC. These were real devastating river floods, but different floods in different centuries. There is no single sheet of mud laid over Mesopotamia in one moment. Woolley himself walked the claim back, and that is the strongest version of the skeptic's case, and it deserves to stand. A land trapped between 2 violent rivers did not need to invent one deluge. It needed to survive many. But it leaves one thread I cannot cut. Of all those mismatched flood layers, the one dated around 2900 BC sits under Shuruppak, the one city that both the prism and the tablet name as the home of the survivor. Nobody can call that proof. Nobody has explained it away either. And here is the question I genuinely can't stop asking. The signed Atrahasis tablet has been in critical edition since 1969. Tablet 11 has been read since 1872. Andrew George's translation is on the shelf of every decent public library. None of this is locked away. So why does the public conversation about the flood, about where Genesis came from, happen almost entirely without these objects on the table? I don't have a conspiracy for you. I don't believe in one. I think it is inertia. I think the Assyriologists speak Assyriologist, and the people making videos speak YouTuber, and there has never really been a bridge between the two. And meanwhile, the clay just sits there, numbered, waiting for someone to say what it says, instead of inventing what it might. George Smith died at 36 of dysentery in Aleppo, still digging for more tablets. He read one piece of clay that shook one empire, and he never saw the prism in Oxford, or the signed Atrahasis, or the round ark, or the silt under Shuruppak. Every decade since, the ground has handed over another page of the same file. So end where the ledger ends. The Sumerians did not believe in the flood the way a churchgoer believes. They filed it. Between one king and the next, a clerk pressed 4 flat words into wet clay. Then the flood swept over and went straight back to counting rains. Maybe that is what a myth looks like. Or maybe that is what it looks like when something happened to a civilization too organized to forget it. I want you to end this video holding that one tablet, K3375, small enough for a hand, and one fact beside it. The last king before the flood is named in Oxford. The son who survived it is named in London. The two names have matched across 4,000 years the entire time. The prism is still on its spindle. The tablet is still in its case. Nobody ever closed the file. And the documented version is stranger than the invented one. It almost always is. There is one name in all of this I left half open. The seventh man, the one who was taken, Enoch. The book that tells his story was thrown out of the Bible on purpose. And on this channel, that door is already open. That is where the real investigation begins, not in fantasy, in the archive.